Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well today. Um, I've got a lesson I want to talk about. I want to take the liberty this morning to share some personal stories from my military career that literally changed my life and had a huge impact in my life, as well as Karen's, of course, in our spiritual journey. There's a member of our class that asked me to speak on at some point when I wanted to um, about some incidents in my life that I referred to but never got in detail about that seemed to be kind of an exciting and also very impactful stories. So I want to go into more detail about those this morning, and I want to share these back because I want to show the significance of them in my spiritual walk. I mean, we all have stories. I know you have stories as well of moments in your life when it just was a time in which you really were faced with your finiteness, or you were faced with God's greatness, or something happened, or something that you observed maybe. And some of these stories I'm going to tell are not necessarily only that I actually were involved in necessarily, but also stories from other people that I was able to be able to listen to or able to digest, and it really profoundly changed me in my walk, and I really, really felt closer to God in a lot of ways for those moments. So as you can imagine, my military career itself was a life-changing event when we came from the local church into the military chaplaincy. I mean, we were a small church in West Texas, all the way to Fort Bragg, or as they call Fort Liberty now these days, as the newest Army chaplain. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I watched a lot of movies on TV, but wasn't near reality. So we went from, with a matter of a few days of driving across the United States from Texas to North Carolina, and it was a life-changing few days when we got there. Adapting to one culture to another within days was exciting, but it was challenging too in a lot of ways. I mean, I changed, and our whole world changed. I went from kind of longer hair when I had hair, and I even had a mustache. So I went from that to very short hair and nothing across my upper lip, and from a three-piece suit or a business suit that I would wear on during the week or on Sundays, all the way to wearing uniforms that the military ushered said that this is what you're going to wear. And there's multiple types of those, from a casual hello to someone on the street to a snappy salute or returning a salute when someone saluted me, from a parsonage that was given to me by the church to live in, and furniture a lot of times was inside the parsonage, to all of a sudden we're into a Army living quarters, they call them. And from a church of one denomination, United Methodist in my case, to a battalion of 1,000 soldiers who had every faith you can imagine, and a whole lot of them who claimed no faith, and possibly even atheists, agnostics, and even some Wiccas involved in all that, all kind of religions. And all of a sudden, it was a dramatic change of who my congregation is going to be. And we started the day off possibly with a leisurely breakfast I used to, and just getting up casually and just having breakfast, with my wife or whatever it may be, and we all casually go off to work. So all of a sudden, I'm up early, sometime before dawn, and I'm running 3 to 5 miles every morning, and then I come back home, and then I get cleaned up, and I have a quick breakfast because there's not a lot of time left, and my wife's already gone to work, and I go back to the unit, and away I start the day. That is a totally dramatic culture change. That itself was a huge impact in our lives. And all this and much more, fearful moments, challenging moments that just shaped our life tremendously. And Karen, when we first started out, was my brand new wife, my bride of less than a year. And I had taken her from Corsicana, Texas, a small little town where her parents lived, where she was a school teacher in that area, different things, different vocations she wanted to do, to all of a sudden we uprooted and we drove all the way across, like I said, to Fort Bragg, and all of a sudden she is now an Army spouse. Not a pastor's wife, but an Army spouse who happened to be married to a chaplain. And so, but there she was by my side. And so that made it tremendously easier on me, of course, and gave me comfort, and we gave each other comfort as we adjusted to the challenges. So a new horizon and new challenges and new opportunities awaited us. So let's get into the first part of a story. And I call this part separation. I could never imagine how much time I would be traveling. And I'm not talking about with her, my wife. I'm talking about by myself with my unit, deployed to a foreign land in a war over and over again, or into the woods of training there for weeks and on a time in over and over again, and being separated from her. And eventually our two young boys when they were born. So when Karen and I look back at our 34 years of active duty as a chaplain, we conservatively thought about it and looked at it, and we know at least 12 years of that we have been separated in our marriage. Now, for us to be able to stick together and be able to be stronger in our marriage, it took some work for sure. And this had a significant impact, our separation in our marriage. It had to have. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had a really good, strong marriage to begin with, and also our faith, our spiritual faith, because we had to walk separately in a lot of ways on our own journey. It was from these times that we had to be a lot more intentional about our relationship, and through our continued communication and paying attention to one another, and not let our separate lives, as they seem to be in her teaching and my chaplaincy, that could pull us apart. But it drew us together. And so at first it was, as we communicated together when I was separated from her, it was only by a slow mail. There was no internet. There was no Gmail. There was no nothing. There was not even cell phones. We had to do it the old-fashioned way with a letter. And I remember being in Saudi Arabia and being in Iraq and places like that, and I would get a letter from her. And it was such a wonderful moment to hold that. I would just look at the envelope before I even opened it up. And then I would open it up and just see her handwriting and picture her writing that. And I would read that letter so slowly. And I'd read it 3 or 4 times before I put it aside. And I'd read it again over and over again until the next letter came along. And so, in fact, to this day, I've kept all those letters that I remember in a box down in the basement. And so I still treasure those times. But that was really revealing ourselves to each other in handwritten form of who we were, what we were struggling with, and how we reinforced one another from a distance. Then after having 2 children, on top of that, she got really busy because I was gone, because we're talking about separation here. But to be able to get a letter, even though at first she wrote the letter for them, as they just scribbled something meaningless on a piece of paper, but it was for Daddy. And I would get those, and I would hang them up wherever I was or carry them with me. And I treasured that, just seeing my little boys writing something to me. And they got more and more legible as they got older each time I was gone. And then I would then try to communicate back to them. And so the first thing I would do, there's several things I would do and communicate with my children, was I would write them a letter and write it in their form they would understand, and then I would put a picture of something funny in there. And then the second way would possibly, I would put a little vial of sand from the desert, wherever I was. If I was in a desert, I put a little vial of sand and give it to them so they could put it on their knick-knack shelf. And a third way would be for them to, when I would be gone, sometimes later on, I went in a long separation, but I was in a lot of short ones. And I'd be gone over a weekend. I had to go speak somewhere or be gone in the field. And so I would always bring back a small gift to give to them. And they expected that. And the rule was only over the weekend. If I was gone for the weekend, I couldn't be there for the soccer games or whatever it may be, I would bring them back a gift. And I'd bring Karen a magnet if there was one for sale wherever I was. But these times, those communication times, I just treasure in memory. I just treasure them because it was reinforcing that we, no matter what physically we were separated, spiritually we were joined as a family. And that was very important to us, and it has been reinforced over the years. There are 2 major events I want to share with you in this separation business that were significant in our life. First of all, while I was deployed to Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, which is in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, we were preparing to do a combat jump, we were told, when we were in We were still in Saudi Arabia at the time, and we're getting ready to go into Iraq to invade it. And so we were told we're going to do a combat jump. And because I was a jump master, I was already trained, I was told that you're going to jump master one of the airplanes going in, which means I was the one had to put everybody out the plane. I was the last out. So I was in charge, if you will, of that airplane, parachutist. And so they brought us together, and they told us that only 20% of us would not be a casualty or be killed. And that's sobering. Out of 100%, 20%. Well, I knew right away that I'll be one of those because I was a jump master. I'll be the last one out, which means I'll be vulnerable a whole lot. And so they allowed us 10 minutes to be able to talk to our families and say goodbye. One last time before they stopped all communication because of, being careful about the information going out to the enemy. I remember getting on the phone with Karen, and I remember that as I talked to her voice, and I didn't tell her the sobering reality of it, but she knew because we communicated by looking at one another like most couples do. And she knew this was a serious phone call. But she was strong. She didn't fall apart, whatever it may be. But she said she'd take care of our children. And I knew that when I heard her voice, that'd be the last time I'd hear it in my belief. And then my children came online with their small voices, and that just tore me apart. But I hope you can imagine that significant moment in my life. And then I had a quick phone call to my dad to say goodbye to them, my mom and dad. And I asked my dad to take care of my family because I probably won't be there any longer to take care of them. And he said he would. Being an old paratrooper himself, he didn't break down. He just said, yes, son, I will. Well, that's a very important part. So just writing about this and thinking about it, it brings those memories back. And it's still sobering, impactful in my life to say goodbye to your family and know it's the last time you'll ever see them. It was a heavy feeling going in, but I had to really check my calling on God. Is this what I really need to do? To give up my family right there on the spot. That was what it was all about. It was me or my family, and my love for them and love for God became into a tension moment. And there was, but because of my calling, because I knew where I needed to be, I took a deep breath and turned my eyes heavenward, and I went forward to do my job, what God brought me there to do, despite what would happen in the case. That is significant in my spiritual walk. The second one that I want to just talk about, is I went for a little over a year deployment to Afghanistan. And on the 4th of July of that year, I was informed that my older son was in intensive care in Dallas, Texas, not expected to live. So my wife and younger son were still at home in Italy, and so they got notified as well. So my wife scrambled to get their passports ready and get a flight from Italy, which is in Venice, over to Dallas, Texas. Whereas I flew straight out of Bagram, Afghanistan to Italy, and from Italy caught a quick plane and actually it was in Germany, come to think of it, and then shot over to Dallas, Texas. I cannot explain to you those long hours sitting there in my dusty military uniforms, all I had on me, no luggage or anything, and I sat there in that seat thinking about what I was facing, and I was helpless. And the prayers I had in those long hours on that plane, I couldn't sleep, of course. I couldn't even eat. All I wanted to do is talk to God and try to figure this out, try to deal with it, of losing my son. And so I got to Dallas, Texas, walked into ICU, and there he was with tubes all in his nose and everything, helping him breathe and everything else. And I just started crying before God. And I spent the next couple of days by myself there before Karen and my other son could arrive. And I spent that time just praying to God, just wanting God's intervention. The one thing I want to point out or just bring up that I don't share very often is that during that time, I remember I just reached the end of my rope. And I leaned down and put my head against his, and I begged God. I said, God, take my life and give me my son. Let him live, but take me. Because, I've gone as far as I need to go, but he's got a young life. Use him, but take me. And I meant with the bottom of my heart. And after all that happened, and Karen came in, and he recovered, of course, and everything, but It was a profound moment that I never forgot. That I just opened my life up. It just revealed exactly uh, my vulnerability and dependence on God, and I kind of got a glimpse, small way, of how a Father in heaven felt as His Son was crucified on the cross and was willing to give His life up. So it helped. It really cemented my faith in so many ways. Well, reflectively, that the Lord had given my family to me to nurture and protect and love brought me even closer to Him. And I leaned on my God to care for them when I wasn't there. But now it became more of a partnership. It wasn't on me only. I could only do what I could do. So I had to lean on God. And that was what faith growth means. Well, let's go to a couple more stories, 3 to be exact. And the next one I entitled World War II Veteran Encounter. When I was assigned to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I came across a book in a library there at the chaplain school entitled Days of Anguish, Days of Hope. It was about a man named Robert Preston, who was a reservist, a chaplain in the Army Air Corps. And the story took my breath away. I could not believe what I read. So allow me to give you a short version of that real fast so you'll see the impact of it. Because the ending is where I want to get to. Robert Preston was a reserve chaplain, like I said, and he was sent to the Philippines on a very 2 or 3 week training thing over in the Philippines. And he just got married like a month earlier. So he didn't really want to go, but he went because that was what his duty to do. So while there in the May of 1941, he was assigned to a unit there, but then war broke out, World War II and Pearl Harbor and all that. So immediately his short tour became a permanent tour. So he was assigned to the Philippines, to the Army there. And those of you who have read of the Battle of the Philippines and the ultimate surrender to the Japanese can recall that unbelievable moment when that happened. And from that surrender, the soldiers were made to make the historic Bataan Death March, where vast numbers of Americans died, beaten, and almost starved to death. Well, Robert Preston was on that march as a chaplain. It was so a powerful story. So while he was in prison, after that Bataan Death March, Chaplain Taylor provided care and guidance for over 10,000 soldiers and patients in the prison army hospital. And because he did provide care for them, he suffered tremendous torture and beatings because of it, and his attempts to alleviate their sufferings. Well, 14 of those times in weeks was spent in solitary confinement, which is a big deal. When you're by yourself and they deprive you of a lot of things, they beat you daily while you're in there. But despite these tremendous adversities, his courageous actions contributed to unbelievable reducing the death of those prisoners and that patients in that hospital. And because of that, he was given a Silver Star for it. Well, Chaplain Taylor survived those horrors of 42 months of Japanese prison camps in Japan and went on to serve as a chaplain in addition 20 years after that, including his selection as the 3rd Air Force, the new formed Air Force Chief of Chaplains, as a 2-star general. And what a great story. Now here's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey says. Going back in time, when the war was ended and all the prisoners were released in the prison camps in Japan, they were put on boats to go home. His new wife, he had been dreaming about her the whole time, thinking about she was waiting on him and all that emotion as you would understand. Well, she met him at the San Diego Pier. Not having seen each other for several years, they went to a nearby coffee shop to talk. And it was there that she told him that he had been listed as missing in action for so long, so she had remarried and created another family. Well, Chaplain Preston, not having any of the plans, because that she was his plan, to reunite with his wife, decided to follow God's calling and remain in the Army Air Corps and eventually become in the Air Force. So that story that he got involved in, resilience and faith in God, in the worst circumstances, humbled me. And all my gripes and sacrifices seemed so pale. So I had to know if he was still alive. I had to meet this man. So various connections I had, I found out that he was still alive, living in Plano, Texas, with his wife and his second wife, I should say. And I found his home phone and held my breath, and I dialed that number. A lady, his wife, answered the phone, introduced myself, and said, and she said he wasn't in, but he was at the Lions Club doing a luncheon speech. But he should be back soon. It's kind of raining there in Plano, Texas at the time. As I was talking to him, I was kind of really disappointed, going, "Oh, rats, I missed him." She goes, "Wait a minute, Chaplain. I think I heard his car just drive up. I think he's here." So my heart was thumping. I couldn't believe it. And we talked. And I asked him to come to Fort Bragg to be my guest with his wife and to be a speaker. Well, he hesitated and said, "Well, Chaplain," said, I've got a Bataan Death March reunion up in the mountains there of North Carolina. That's true, but we're going to go from there to Virginia to see our son." And he hesitated, and he talked to his wife briefly, and he goes, "You know what we can do? We'll leave several days earlier and drop by Fort Bragg, and we'll speak for you." I was just elated. I couldn't believe it. And so he did. Well, one night before his talk, he came to that front door of my home, a tall, straight, right off a recruiting poster. And he came into our house with his wife for dinner that night. A humble spirit, but a courageous spirit that he had never dimmed over the years. We sat and we did the necessary talking and different things like that. But he didn't really even talk about his exploits that much. What he did talk about, which is even more important, was talked about his faith and talked about what sustained him during that time. And the words that he spoke just stirred my heart. I'll never forget those moments. He was there. He was a giant to me of spiritual faith, but yet there he sat in a humble spirit, and I remember his wife listening to him, sitting there quietly, eating my wife's pot roast, which she loved, and looked at him with awe and with pride at him. And then his wife spoke up and said, "You know what the real challenge was for us? Is him recovering from all that ordeal that he went through, and for us to be together as a couple." And so at that unspoken moment, my wife and I looked at each other as if to say, we too will bear the unknowns together with God's help. That was a significant moment in my spiritual life. Well, let me go to another one. And I call this the Vietnam veteran experience, an encounter. I was at Fort Bragg, and to hear a speaker by the name of Colonel Benjamin Purcell. He was a POW in Vietnam. He was invited by the special operation people to come in and to talk about how to survive if you're a captive and your resiliency you had to have, because he was an expert in it, of course. He was captured as an enemy and he survived as a prisoner. So he spent more than 5 years as a POW in Vietnam. As I listened in the audience to this remarkable man, I was drawn into what I would do in that same circumstance if my faith was challenged like that. And as I listened to him, I reflected on my calling as a chaplain and the possibilities of being in his shoes, but maybe another war, of course. Well, let me tell you a story as I remember it. But what happened later in our relationship at the end of this story, like this last story, I want to focus in on. But I want you to understand the man and his faith. In Vietnam, his helicopter was shot down on February 8th, 1968, and he and 5 other passengers were captured by the Viet Cong. Well, Colonel Purcell was the highest-ranking Army officer captured during the Vietnam War. He spent more than 5 years in captivity, and most of that was in solitary confinement, which is huge, more hardship than ever. You had no one else to lean on or talk to. So here's his words, I remember. He said, on that date, we were hit by, in a helicopter, hit by a machine gun fire. We caught fire and crash landed in a cemetery. After the crash, we were surrounded, taken prisoner, tied up. That means our thumbs were tied together and our arms behind our back, and we were searched. Within hours, the first big challenge came, he said. After dark, we marched off toward the mountains to the southwest. And on the way to the first camp, the passenger who had been burned in the crash was permitted to stop for a short rest, and the others were ordered to keep on continuing down the trail. Within minutes, I heard the sound of a pistol shot, and had the terrifying thought that the VC had killed him. The young soldier has not returned and been officially listed as killed in action. In turn, all the prisoners were subjected to harsh environments, interrogation, by the military to get information from them. And some prisoners were tortured, and they were all deprived of food to weaken them down, and medicines to various degrees. He said, at first I found it difficult to lie convincingly, but soon I became an expert of lying convincingly. And the interrogations for military information, after about 6 months in captivity, they stopped doing that. Then the process became brainwashing, trying to make us where we agreed with them. Well, he retired he retired from the Army in 1980, and he passed away in 2013 at the age of 85. Now you know the story, but let me tell you about the Christian man that really impacted me. He told this story to me. He said, we got a Red Cross package, and inside of it was some gum, some Wrigley's gum. He said we couldn't keep any paper, nothing. We might use it for sending messages or something like that. So they gave it to us, and they came back and took all the wrappings from us. Well, they messed up the paper so I couldn't tell, and I took the cellophane, the hard part that encases the sticks of gum. I took that and I hid it. Then I took one of the wrappers from the gum, the paper part, and I hid that. And then I looked like they got it all of it. And I put it inside the crevice of the bricks of my prison cell. Well, I took them out after they left, and I made the cellophane, the hard part of the package of gum, into a tiny chalice. I twisted the middle of it, and it became a little cup. And I took that piece of paper, he said, and I made it into a plate where I would then hide those. And every night after dinner, when the guards left me and walked off before they came back for the next round, I would take that little cup and that little piece of paper that was the plate out of the crevice of the bricks, and I put water and a few crumbs I had saved of crackers on the plate, and I knelt down in the corner of my cell in prayer, and I had Holy Communion with God. He said I did that every night I could before they could discover it. They never did discover it. So he said, that's what sustained me. And I thought about that. What an unbelievable story that he would do that, of hanging in there and doing stuff like that. I thought it was just a huge, profound message to me that no matter what, you can do a lot of things, but the love of the Lord, if you have that deep faith, that resiliency in your soul during the hardest times, it will sustain you, but you've got to reach out to God best you can. Well, here's the rest of the story that's really impactful. He agreed to come speak to me. He lived in Georgia mountains, and he was raising Christmas trees. So a unit I belonged to was a helicopter unit. So we took a Black Hawk helicopter and we flew over to Georgia to pick him up at the airport, the little small airport. Well, half the town was there because they haven't seen an Army helicopter way up there. So it was a big tourist attraction. So we landed, and as a helicopter was coming to a still, I walked out to get him, and there he stood with his wife, and he had his old Vietnam uniform on. It was kind of cool. And I walked over to him, and the mayor was there, and the councilman, and all kind of people, and I just greeted them all, and whatever it may be, and he was so proud to be there. And he said, well, would y'all like to have some lunch? We have Burger King real nearby, and we all will treat you. I didn't know, so I asked the pilots, said, oh, sure, we're starving. So we got back in their vehicles. They took us to Burger King, packed out the house, and we sat there and had hamburgers with them. Came back to the airport, and we all got ready to go. The whole town was there as usual. And the pilots went back to the helicopter, started up. And I was in my uniform with my flight helmet and all that. And so I told him, I said, sir, are you ready to go? He goes, yeah, go ahead. And there's another crew person there. I said, why don't you take him to the helicopter? And his wife stopped me. She goes, Chaplain, can I talk to you privately for a moment? I said, well, sure. So went off to the side. And she's a little short thing. And she looked up into my eyes with the most sobering look I've ever seen. And she said, Chaplain, The last time he flew in a helicopter, I never saw him for 5 years. You bring him home to me. Whoa. What do you say? All I could do is just kind of nod. I said, yes, ma'am, I promise. Almost tears in my eyes. So, went back to the helicopter, plugged in my mic, and as they were getting ready to go, I radioed the pilots and I said, and told them what she had said. And their response was, wow, you bet, Chaplain, we'll fly like we never flew before. And we brought him back home. Spiritual hope and resiliency. That is the key. On the harshest of times, reach out to God. And that taught me that. And that would have a profound effect on me, that God will not abandon you no matter what cell you're in, what type of cell you're in. Well, let me close with one more story, if I may. And this happened to both Karen and I. And once again, it happened at Fort Bragg. I'm sorry to keep going back there, but that's where I spent a lot of my time. We came there, and we lived in a rental house right off Post. And so we were there till housing opened up on Post. One day I came back from work, and Karen asked me, she said, do you know about the name of Rowe, a Colonel Rowe? I said, oh, yeah. I said, he's famous. She said, well, guess what? His wife just moved next door to us. I was shocked. Well, here's the story how that came to be. 29 October 1963, in Vietnam, First Lieutenant James Nick Rowe with his team were ambushed, and all the 3 Americans were captured. Rowe would spend 5 years himself in captivity. On New Year's Eve in '68, after 5 years of imprisonment, Rowe escaped, and he broke away from his captors when an American helicopter task force attacked the VC that was moving him to another location, so a battle ensued. Well, Rowe waved desperately at one of the attacking helicopters, and it landed and allowed him to board, and to their surprise, this bearded guy turned out to be a Caucasian, an American, and he was rescued. In April 21, 1989, moving forward in time, he was in the Philippines with his wife, Susan, and their children. He was leaving that morning for work, and he came out of his home to get into his armored vehicle. And the New People's Army, a guerrilla outfit, attacked his car. And 21 bullets entered his car, and he was killed immediately. Well, immediately his family was grabbed by the security people and put them on a plane and sent them out of there because they knew they were also going to be casualties. They were stayed there any longer for safety. And that's how Susan Rowe ended up next door to us. She had been flown straight from the Philippines and arrived at that rental home with furniture already in it and waiting for her household goods, rest of stuff to come in. And Karen just happened to see her and greeted her and found out who she was. Well, I was just unbelievable. And then Karen said the interesting thing. She said she doesn't have a chaplain, and she said she'd like to talk to you because she really needs to speak to someone. Well, to sum it all up real fast, to finish this up, I went next door to her, greeted her, and I ended up becoming her chaplain. And I counseled with her her grief about losing her husband, the fear and all that trauma that occurred. And then when all of her stuff came in, a lot of his stuff came in, she asked me to look through his stuff in the garage because some of it needs to be thrown away, or she had no idea, and some may be probably is classified, and there was classified stuff in there, which I'm glad I found it. And then it came time for his funeral. And so she had his uniform there to get it ready so they could have a funeral. And she asked me to look at it, make sure the ribbons were all correct. Oh man, I was so honored to do that, but at the same time. And so I worked on that as well. But what struck me about this whole thing, to kind of end this up, is that God placed Karen and I at the right time, at the right opportunity, in a most unusual situation, where I was just we were doing our everyday living that we did, and right there in our midst, God placed someone who needed healing, who needed the peace of God in their life. And from all my experiences, and from Karen's experiences, we were able to be that person, that agent for God in those people. And so that really profoundly changed Karen and I, saying this is unbelievable that we were able to do this. And we helped her get through her time, and she's doing fine. I understand she still lives in North Carolina somewhere and is remarried. But the point I'm saying is obvious. Don't let fear consume you. Don't let things happen to you that you say, I'm alone. God is going to use you. No matter how old you are or what circumstance you are, God will bring people into your life that you will help them under God's direction. All right, me in this, I could go on more stories. There's so many more. But I thought those few would be example of how God has brought special people in my and Karen's life and has changed and deepened our faith tremendously. So here are 3 questions I ask you before I do a closing prayer. Who in your life, as you reflect, have been an important faith-deepening moment? Number 2, who have directly or even indirectly helped you to see God at work? All of a sudden, they're a great witness to God. And 3rd, who have been brought into your life that God has used you to strengthen, challenge, to help them and also help you grow? Who has come into your life? Our closing prayer. Master and Savior, thank you for never leaving me, never forsaking me, or never not answering my deepest needs. You have led people into my life to answer those needs, allowed me to help others as your instruments of grace. Thank you for the witness of faith and love I have encountered. Help me to be a witness of my own faith. Amen. May the Lord bless you. May God be with you.